a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, now in a liquor store near you, all of Greater Minnesota, you lucky folks. I'm John Bona from Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Let's just get the ugly numbers right off the bat. Like, let's start with that. Let's not try to fool anybody here. They're ugly. I mean, they've been ugly for a while, and they get uglier, and this week has not been any different. Obviously, they go to Miami. They lose 2 out of 3 to not a good Marlins team, but a relatively hot, at least very recently, Marlins team with some good pitching that the Twins certainly saw. Although at this point,
everything's good pitching when you're scoring 3 runs per series.
Yeah, it's like, you get shut out on Sunday Night Baseball by Tarek Skubal. He's probably the best pitcher in the league. Reigning Cy Young winner, might win another one. And yeah, you can make the case that a couple of the pitchers they saw from the Marlins were pretty good. Although, yeah, like you said, it's tricky because it's like, well, yeah, these guys maybe are good, but some of them haven't performed that well. And why is it that all these pitchers kind of click into place against the Minnesota Twins lineup, I guess?
It's clear the lineup is frustrated, too. Like, you can see it in the at-bats right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone's frustrated with them. Why wouldn't they be frustrated with themselves?
Of course, right.
I guess at this point. So I'll go through the numbers and we can kind of move on with our life here. But they lose 2 out of 3 to Miami. The Twins, as we record this Friday morning, they are now 41-46. Which I believe is the 5th worst record in the American League. In their last 11 series, they have won 1 of the last 11. The Sacramento series, they are now 1-9-1. The tie in Seattle is that 1 in their last 11 series, and 7-19 in the last 30 days. So the last month, basically.
Yeah,
7-19, which I believe is the worst record in the American League. And then, to our point that we were talking about with the lineup. They scored 3 total runs across the last 4 games during that span. They batted 142, and that's bad. Here's the part that really, I think, speaks to the ugliness of like specific at-bats and swings and just approach-wise and all that. While scoring the 3 runs in 4 games and batting 142, they had 42 strikeouts and 4 walks. I mean,
it's so funny because a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I guess, is it this point or is it a week ago? 2 weeks ago, we sat in Baldelli's office as he talked about why they ended up pulling out a game versus the Reds in that series, and he must have mentioned plate discipline as something that he saw from that team in that game that led to that success. He mentioned it at least once in like 4 different questions that we had during that. Then they went out and waved futilely at Mizorowski for 5 or 6 innings. And then really that was the last time we saw much in the way of offense from this team.
Yeah, and I mean, there are different ways, whether you're talking about an individual hitter or a group of hitters or an entire lineup, there's a lot of different ways to score runs, right? I mean, you can be a high strikeout approach if you have a lot of power. Mm-hmm. You can be a high strikeout approach if you draw a lot of walks.
Right.
You can be a low power approach if you rarely strike out and draw some walks. There's a lot of different ways to do it, a lot of different combinations that work. But I can tell you that whether you're looking at a player, I mean, if a player had a 42-4 strikeout to walk ratio, we would be like, this guy is overmatched in the majors. He has to be sent down to the minors. I mean, it's like, go look at like Deshaun Kersey's strikeout to walk ratios. I mean, we used to marvel at, let's say, I don't know, Eddie Rosario.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he was
somebody who would occasionally have a 10-1.
Yes, but usually it was like 6-1 or something like that. Like he'd have 120 strikeouts and 25 walks or something like that. And he was on kind of right on the fence of like, ooh, this is if it goes a little worse, you're not a major league hitter. And 42-4 for an entire lineup is just absurdity. And some of that is good pitching, but some of that is bad hitting, but also just from an approach standpoint, it's no longer even the case that they're swinging at strikes a lot of the times. Like you look at after all these games, I mean, the Skubal game, okay, I'm willing to write that off a little bit because he makes everybody look like a little league team. But some of these Miami games, you look at the strike zone plot and, you know, the swings and misses and even just swings in general. I mean, they are hacking at balls a foot outside the zone or, you know, at their eyes, at their ankles, like especially with 2 strikes. I mean, they are just going fishing basically. Yep. And, you know, you can point to, I know Brooks Lee's had a bunch of bad at bats. Yeah. Royce Lewis has had some.
He's chasing a high fastball a lot.
I think even Correa, which is completely uncharacteristic for him. And I know he struggled this year. We've talked about that a ton, but
to see stuff away down and low, he is just swinging and swinging and swinging.
And so you get a whole lineup full of those dudes, and it's like this is what you get. And you know,
I'm sorry. You can understand an offense slumping, especially when everybody's hitting 142, right? I mean, really, all you have to say is they're hitting 142 as they hit 142 over this stretch, and you know that the offense is going to be poor. There's just no way around that not being a poor offense. What the 42-4 suggests is that's not just bad luck.
Right.
You know, that's not just hits aren't falling in when you're hitting 142. When it's 42-4 in terms of strikeout to walk ratio, that's just there's not a lot of indicators suggesting things are going to get better in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean it's bad process and bad results. Most of the time, if you show me almost any major league lineup, Twins included, and you say there was a 4-game stretch where they batted 142, well, I know they didn't hit well, obviously, like you said, but I would probably think, well, I bet they had some bad batting average on balls in play, or they got robbed of hits. And maybe there's been some of that. I mean, you can point to individual balls in play, probably that, this should have been a hit. But there weren't that many of those, really, because they were striking out a ton. The quality of the at-bats was terrible. When they got to 2 strikes, they were just flailing away at everything. They weren't even really in deep counts, which goes to the 4 walks. I mean, it was just bad. And the thing, I mentioned Lewis, and he's fine. He's got 2 hits, I think, whatever. I don't want to really parse every at bat he's had or something, but now that he's back, the weird part of this is the lineup is completely healthy.
Right.
Or the lineup is active, at least. I don't want to, maybe some guys are banged up, including Lewis, who knows? But what I mean is none of the guys they had on the opening day roster, none of the hitters they had on the opening day roster, 13 of them, are injured. Now, 3 or 4 of them have been demoted to the minors. Right. Miranda, Julian, Gasper. Maybe am I missing a 4th one? And, a lot of them are struggling. But I guess my point is they have the full complement of hitters that they intended to begin the season with. They have the full 13.
Certainly the cornerstones.
Nobody's hurt.
They thought was going to be
Luke Keishel's hurt, but Luke Keichel played 7 games for them in May or whatever it was. Maybe he would have been called up at this point anyway, but he was not part of the plan to begin the season. And I guess what I'm getting at there is this kind of goes to my pet theory that's been increasing in my brain over the last 6 months, I guess. This just isn't a good core of hitters. Right. This once maybe looked to be, and for stretches has been, but this is the group they wanted to begin the season with. They're all healthy, or they're all active at least. They're all healthy enough to be active.
Listen, a month ago we were saying we're finally going to see the lineup that we expected to see, and will we see the offense that we expected to see? And the answer is, as of right now, certainly the 4 cornerstones: Buxton, Correa, Wallner, Lewis, healthy. Larnach, also somebody we were kind of looking forward to breakthrough, healthy. Jeffers in the lineup. I mean, Ty France at first base, Willie Castro,
Harrison Bader. I mean, this is the group that they built, right? I mean, this is the group. There's no, just wait until this guy comes back.
Right.
And like I said, 3 or 4 of those guys have been demoted to the minors. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have been demoted to the minors, but also that was your group you built. Whose fault is that? And so as I look more and more on this, do I think they're as bad as they've looked recently? No, obviously not. Do I think there's still potentially an average offense here somewhere? Yeah, maybe. I mean, they've shown flashes of that. They're not that far from average overall for the season. But in terms of a year ago at this point, when they had a top 5 or 6 offense, and we were starting to think, could this be a well above average offense? Could this be one of the best offenses?
Sure.
I no longer even have any notion of that being the case. And my worry is there's no longer like just wait till this happens. Just wait till this guy. This is the group. Like this is what they built for better, and it turns out more so for worse.
Well, and we're closing in on 5 months of this. This was from the middle of August last year. We're approaching the middle of July this year. And the problem the entire time or the consistent part about this team the entire time has been, we're just not seeing any offense. We're not seeing the offense we expected to see.
Right. And the weird part right now is, Buxton's having an incredible first half.
Right.
Willie Castro's having a great first half. And then just everyone else. I mean, even you look at guys like Larnach, who's been okay. I mean, Jeffers has been okay. But really, it's Buxton and it's Castro. And everyone else is average or below average. And some of them are, well below average. Obviously, having your highest paid player, Correa, have the worst OPS among all regulars is going to be pretty damaging too. So I don't know. And to your point, I just looked up this morning because I was like, hey, it's 4th of July. How can I depress everyone 7:30 a.m. on Twitter and Blue Sky? I like to depress across mediums.
Sure.
I looked up their record over the last 162 games. So dating back to actually basically this point last season, 74-88 over the last 162 games. And during that span, they rank 21st out of 30 in runs scored as an offense and 21st out of 30 in runs allowed as a pitching staff. And they have a negative 56 run differential. And so, I would say we've seen more stretches of good pitching during that 162 games than we have of good hitting. But we've also seen horrendous pitching stretches over that span, and it all kind of comes out in the wash where you're 21st out of 30 in both categories, in scoring and preventing runs. You've been outscored by 56 runs over 162 games. Yeah, and by the way, that includes a 13-game winning streak. That doesn't include the 12-game winning streak from last year, which was earlier than that. But yeah, it's I think now they're back from Miami. They start a 9-game homestand tonight. You get the Rays, you get the Cubs, you get the Pirates, and then you get the All-Star break. And it's getting late early,
Right, yeah.
For the Yogi Berra-ism. Like, I just think, let me put it this way. There are only 21 games as we record this until the trade deadline, which is on July 31st. For the Twins just to be at 500 at the trade deadline, which is no great accomplishment, but I feel like 500 at the trade deadline, you can at least convince yourself to take either path, buy or sell, or neutral, I guess, which they've taken 2 years in a row. But we'll talk more about that in a second. Just to get to 500 at the trade deadline, they have to go 13-8 over their remaining 21 games.
Sure.
I'd love to see it. I will be absolutely blown away if they're able to go 13-8 or even, something close to that leading into the All-Star break. Now, certainly a 9-game or leading into the trade deadline, certainly a 9-game homestand heading into the All-Star break is a good situation to be in. And I really think that this next week and a half, starting tonight against the Rays, is going to be the whole season, both in terms of, is this still a salvageable season? Is this still a season in which you can, if not make the playoffs, at least be in the playoff picture deep into the season? And then shorter term than that, it's going to determine what you should, or at least you could do at the trade deadline. And I've increased, and I don't know how you wouldn't lose faith in this team at this point. I mean, they've been playing terribly now for, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks, whatever it is. And to your point, really 6 months overall. And if they're not able to get right on this 9-game homestand heading into the little break of the All-Star,
come out of it against Colorado, do some damage there.
Sure, but then you play the Dodgers. I mean,
then figure out some way to survive the Dodgers and maybe do something versus the Nationals.
Here's the truth: they're well past the point where the schedule matters,
right?
In terms of opponent quality.
No, you're right.
Like they're the
just lost 2-3 to the Marlins,
right? And I mean, they're what I say, 6-17 or whatever. They're at the point now where they got to get their stuff together.
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, if you want to hear me say the other S word, subscribe to the Patreon.
You can even hear me occasionally swear now.
Oh my God. People, by the way, agree with me. John dropped what I believe is the first legitimate F-bomb from him, certainly not from me, but from him in the history of the podcast. And multiple people have chimed in because you were like, oh, I don't think it's the first one.
I don't think that's the biggest one.
Multiple people have said, because here's the thing. You've sworn on the podcast before, but we used to edit them out of the free show.
Well, that's true.
Like
that's
when
true.
we used to do the show at bars and stuff, we'd each be like 6 beers in and John turns into a sailor at that point instead of a choir boy. Now he's kind of like a drunken choir boy, which is a whole nother thing to deal with. But anyway, yeah, that's all available on the Patreon. If you thought to yourself, what would it even sound like to hear John Bonus swear? Well, I got an episode for you. We should charge extra for it. But so, yeah, I mean, that's the state of the team as they start this 9-game homestand. I guess what I'm saying, I'm not expecting them to go, 7-2 or something on this 9-game homestand. Obviously, that would be tremendous. But what I'm saying is if they cannot at least stop this plummet
right
during this 9-game homestand, in my mind, I'm not saying this is how they would approach it, because as we're going to talk about in a moment, they have some real conflicting, I guess I'll call it motivations from a ownership and from a front office and even from maybe a managerial and coaching staff standpoint that really kind of run counter maybe to logic as a fan base at least might see this team. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But if you can at least kind of get your head above water here during this 9-game homestand, to me, that's it. Pull the plug. And
right, I mean, they've got to go 5-4 on this homestand. They've got to have a winning
something
homestand,
like that.
and that's not necessarily the easiest thing. They're facing the Rays, they're facing the Cubs. These are two good teams for the first two series, and they got Pittsburgh coming here. But like you said, I'm not sure the quality of the opponent matters anymore. They either have to figure out how to hit or pitch really super well, because that's the only way they've shown any ability to actually win some games here.
Yeah,
this year.
I mean, I agree with all that, and I think, yeah, it's still early, but it's not that early relative to the trade deadline. And I do think that, well, certainly we've seen this from Twins teams before who have, I think, 2017 even, sold at the deadline and then played well and made the playoffs or
right.
stayed in the playoff picture, certainly. That's not impossible, but it's early still, relatively, although you're well past the half point now. It's early in the sense that the season's going to go till late September, but it's not early in the sense that the trade deadline is in 4 weeks and you are at least going to have to determine a path at the trade deadline. And that's more how I'm kind of compartmentalizing the rest of the season. And because, look, if you're 4 weeks from now still below 500 and you want to buy, fine. I don't think they will, but you could take that approach to try to make a wild card spot and just salvage what you can from this season. And that's not the worst scenario. But I think more likely, based on the past two deadlines, is them doing nothing.
Yeah.
If they're in a buyer or neutral position, they will take the neutral position. They've literally almost done nothing the past two trade deadlines, despite the fact that, by the way, two trade deadlines ago in 2023, they were in first place at the trade deadline. And they had like 70-something% playoff odds. And then last year at the trade deadline, they were not in first place, but they had a much better record than they had. 90%
playoff odds.
Well, I looked. It got that way in August, but at the trade deadline, they were like 78%.
Okay. All right.
And they were in the second wild card spot. They were like 10 games above 500. And in both those instances, one year in first place with like low 70% playoff odds in 2023. And then in 2024, you're in second place, but you're in very prime wild card spot position, and you have even higher, like 78% playoff odds. They did nothing. They acquired Trevor Richards, and the year before that, Dylan Floro, which I'm going to count as nothing. No offense to those guys. And so then I look at this team and I go, even if they're right around 500, let's say at the trade deadline, which, like I said, they'd have to go like 13-8 or 12-9 to get basically at that point. What evidence is there that they'd be in much worse position than they were the previous 2 years? What makes you think they're going to buy, particularly when you fold in the idea of the owners, they're going to invest in this team at the trade deadline with like 20-something% playoff odds when they don't even want to own the team at this point. They want to be out the door. They want to make this somebody else's problem. And your odds are, a third of what they were the past two seasons. And so my assumption is if you're sort of on the neutral buyer, I don't know, teetering back and forth, they're going to take neutral, which is just a nice way of saying doing nothing. And then what I really want to get into on today's show is what if they're really clearly on the seller path? Like, what if they go, instead of going 13-8 between now and the deadline, what if they go 8-13, which is certainly how they've performed over the last 6 weeks? Then at that point, you're 10 games below 500 at the trade deadline with only 50 something games to play. You're basically like 8th or 9th in line for 3 wild card spots. Your playoff odds are going to be like maybe 10% at that point.
Sure.
Everything at that stage is pointing to selling. Well, as we'll get into later in the show, there's a difference between like selling the guys who aren't going to be on the team next year, of which they have quite a few. We're going to run through them. But this team seems like it needs more than that, like from a core shakeup standpoint. But before we get into all that, the question
is really when we're going to do that. So before we do, let's cover a couple of sponsors, including starting with our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. I've got good news for you folks. I don't know if they're here on the 4th of July, their tap room is open, but you no longer have to worry about their tap room being open on the 4th of July because Black Stack Brewing is now distributed to every place. They're Grand Rapids, Rochester, Winona, Fargo, your local liquor store, your specialty liquor store. And that's great news because what they do well is they do beer well. Different tap rooms hang their heads on different things. Some have really good events, right? Some have a really nice tap room. I think Black Stack does a decent job at both of those things. But what Black Stack is known for is their beer. And it was a shame that you couldn't get it any place except a few special places. So especially like their local 755 New England IPA, which is their flagship IPA, super good. But I also like their lighter stuff, their Slopes French Pilsner, which is great, or their Pull Tabs Pale Ale. They've got a sour. They've got lots of great stuff that you can try. And you're going to be going to some 4th of July, or at least I'm going to be going to some 4th of July stuff this weekend. And I would encourage you, grab a 6-pack or a 4-pack or whatever they're selling at your local liquor store and bring them and show them to your friends because they're going to, you might want to buy some extras because they're going to be grabbing them. So stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280 when they're open, or even easier, just ask for them at your local liquor store, Black Stack Brewing.
Our next sponsor is comes in handy during a 9-game week and a half homestand, which is the Game Time app. And Game Time is a way to get last-minute tickets, hard-to-find tickets, and then also just to get good value on your tickets. Because a lot of the times, you're buying this stuff sight unseen. And you can look at the section and the price point, and you can kind of do the math in your head. But one of the things the Game Time app offers is they can sort by basically best value, and they can show you where the ticket is, so that you're not just going, I think this will be decent, let's spend this amount. They can basically say, here's the best value for this price point. This is the section and the row that you actually want to sit in.
And one of the advantages of having a team that seems to be struggling right now is that you go to those third-party vendors like Game Time. You can find those seats a little bit cheaper. They're a little bit more available than they would be.
You can pitch like the 8th inning if you want. Like at that point, you go sit in the bullpen. I think they might have.
Well, and that is the nice thing too about them is that you can order it at the last second, and it's being delivered to your phone, and you're walking in the door. I have really been at Brixworth on the patio drinking beer and decide, you know what, I need that. Or we run into a friend. I'm like, come and join us at the game. I'll get you the 3rd ticket. I go into the Game Time app, grab it, and we're good to go.
Yes, and our listeners get a pretty good deal with Game Time too.
They do. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You download the game. Here's how it goes. It's not a website. So you download the Game Time app, create an account, and you use the code Gleeman when you create that account, and you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. So terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Gleeman, Gleeman. That's right there at the top of the screen. You can see it for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price is guaranteed.
Okay. So I guess we should also mention, you said it's right there on the screen. That's for people who are watching on YouTube. Some of the people still are only listening, which is fine too. We like you guys too. But if you've ever wanted to watch us on YouTube, we now have a new, I think this is our 2nd full week here of Gleeman and the Geek YouTube channel.
Yes.
And not only are we posting the full episodes, which you're listening to right now or watching right now, the full hour-plus episode on YouTube, but throughout the week then we're posting clips, both called shorts, which are like minute-long, just little, low-calorie kind of stuff we talked about, and also, 5-minute, 7-minute, 8-minute clips, stuff like that of kind of key topics that we hit. So if you subscribe to the Gleaming in the Geek YouTube, you will basically get a full week every week of Twins Talk, kind of full length and also chopped up a little bit. So we would love to have you join.
This weekend, we're going to have some special content on there because you might recall a couple Fridays ago, we got a block of wood that was supposed to bring luck to the Twins. And instead, the Twins went right in the tank versus the Brewers. Yeah. So we talked about last week burning said block of wood that we were supposed to knock on to keep things. And we found a burner last Friday. And so we have a video of a Gleaming of the Geek listener, friend of the podcast, Adam Sjogren, burning the piece of wood up at his cabin. And so we're going to post that out there sometime this weekend. I also have, Aaron, a new way to try and turn the luck around. I got to show you what Chrissy bought me here.
Okay.
The TC Bear prayer candle.
It seems like though you're just like into burning stuff now.
Well, that maybe
wood candles.
Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to.
You're doing it right now.
The prayer candle right now for the podcast.
Boy.
There you go. See it?
Okay. You gonna say a prayer?
Well, yeah. You don't think I do every game?
Well, it's not working. Do
No,
you say it? Do you say it for the Twins?
Well, that's because I didn't have the prayer candle before. Aaron.
Right. Yeah. Okay, fine. I mean, I've reached the point now with you and Superstitions that I just sort of go, okay, because it's clearly not working.
So tell me who I'm praying for this week, Aaron Gleeman.
You pray for me first of all.
I think you've got some names queued up for that I should be praying for. Maybe Bailey Ober being one of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, go up and down the roster, really. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about Ober because that has sort of come to a resolution a little bit. We tried to predict what would happen on the last Patreon show on Wednesday, and I basically got it right. But they finally reached the point where they just couldn't continue with this. I mean, he went 0-5 with a 9.00 ERA in the month of June, allowed 14 homers, which is tied with Bert Blyleven for the most home runs ever allowed in the month of June. It's as bad a month as you can basically have. And John, you're going to want to get rid of this video that's on the screen. Pause now. Over. Come on, buddy. A new round of things for me to pick on of John, by the way, now that we're on video. If people thought there was audio stuff for me to pick on. Guy's taking a drink and just not looking at this screen that he's controlling. But mean old Aaron, back again on video too. Now you guys can see what I look like when I'm being a jerk to John. You
want to see the video again?
No, I don't. I want you to just focus your energies on trying to make a show that people are going to watch and listen to. With Ober, I get that they wanted to give him as much leash as they could because prior to June, he had pitched pretty decently, and at least his strikeouts were down a little bit, the velocity was down a little bit, but he was pitching pretty well. He still had a 3-something ERA. It was at least relatively in line with the rest of his career, and we've seen from Ober over the years that he will have some of these blow-up starts. They're usually the first start of the season, but and recover from it pretty quickly and then get back on track and have a good stretch. They were clearly hoping that would be the case here when he started to struggle, the first couple of starts of June. But when you toss in the fact that the velocity was way down, there were games where he walked 6 guys, which he doesn't do in a month sometimes. Strikeouts were way down. Homers were, through the roof, obviously. And there was a physical issue, too, which is the hip that he's been dealing with from spring training. And so I feel like you fold all those factors into it. And to me, they should have probably cut bait or at least shut him down, which they ended up doing finally. They placed him on the IL with a left hip impingement. The problem, though, as we discussed throughout all this, is who's replacing him. And as we record this, we literally still don't know who's replacing him. So they moved Chris Paddock up from Saturday to Friday, which is tonight, to buy them basically 24 hours longer to decide who they want to step into Ober's rotation spot, which will now come up Saturday against the Rays. It could be Travis Adams for a short start. It could be a bullpen game.
It would be on Travis Adams. Travis Adams is somebody in AAA who's been on one of the things that the Twins have been trying out in the minor leagues, which is throwing 60 to 80 pitches every 4 days, like consistently, and not that they're not doing a 4-man rotation down there. They're just having a group of guys try and do that, so they find some way to get them into those games. Saturday would line up with his 4th day.
Yes, because he started for the Saints Tuesday,
right? So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off.
Yeah,
and then his 4th day is Saturday. Right?
Now he wasn't good Tuesday. He didn't make it out of the 3rd inning.
No, he didn't do a very good job Tuesday. No.
And last time they called up Travis Adams, he stuck around for 3 days, didn't pitch, and went back to the minors. He's certainly not a top prospect, but unfortunately, Festa and Simeon Woods-Richardson are already in the rotation. Zebby Matthews is injured. Pablo Lopez is injured. And the guy who would be the best prospect next in line at AAA, which is Andrew Morris, is injured.
Right.
You look, it could be someone like Marco Raya, who's pitched a little better of late, but he's still got, 6.5 ERA at AAA. Corey Lewis has been terrible and just pitched again and has a 8 ERA at AAA. Randy Dobnik's got a 7 ERA at AAA. There just aren't any real, not even appealing options, but almost just like competent options.
Feasible options. Right.
Yeah. Even just for a start or two to get you through to this period, to get you to the All-Star break where you can maybe reset or something like that. And so, yeah, I guess my assumption is it'll be Travis Adams maybe paired with, Joey Wentz or something like that. Someone who can piggyback, give a little length, try to get through 5 innings between the two of them, something. But it's not a good situation, and I definitely think that played a part in sticking with Ober, in my mind at least, a start or two longer than they probably should have. I thought it became very clear that Ober just was not right. He just was not physically right, and they went 0-5 in his starts, and most of them, they were out of the game in the 3rd inning or something. And that's played a big part in the collapse of this team over the last month or so. But if you had even a healthy Andrew Morris or Zebby coming back, I think they would have probably pulled the plug on Ober a week or two ago, but you just didn't. And I guess you can make the argument, like, are you expecting any of the guys who are now going to replace him, whoever that ends up being, Adams, etc., to be significantly better than that? Well, I would expect them to have a lower ERA than 9.0, but I don't expect the Twins to win many of those games, really, if it's 3 starts, 4 starts. And I also now think this raises the question of, like, what is the plan or the timeline with Bailey Ober? Because from the Twins' point of view, and Baldelli even said this after they placed him on the IL a couple days ago, where he was like, guys pitched through this, Bailey pitched through it, but he just felt he got to the point where he couldn't pitch through it. Well, if they're not even kind of willing to say this is a specific injury, then what is the plan or the timeline for him returning to the rotation? Because it's not like, he'll be healed in 4 weeks. Well, if it's just a matter of let's give him some time and he can work behind the scenes and try to get his mechanics right and maybe let this calm down. But it's let's say it's still a situation, and I'm just speculating because they really haven't talked much about what the actual injury is, where he's just going to have to pitch through it whenever he returns.
Sure.
That to me is a pretty scary thing too, because I just have no faith in his ability to pitch through it. So that's where the rotation's at.
He was pitching through it and being somewhat effective in May. I mean, that's we don't know exactly how much it was significant.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think, he was pitching through it and that existed, but I think it got to a point where it flared up again. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe the hope is they get the flare down. You know what I mean? To the point where coming out of the All-Star break, 2-3 weeks of rest here.
Right, but there's still 2 months after the All-Star break. Like, how are we getting him through this? And this is not meant to criticize Bailey Ober. He's clearly hurt. And it's not his fault they don't have better options, obviously. But I guess that the rotation at this point is basically Joe Ryan and pray for rain. Although I will give Simeon Woods-Richardson some credit here.
Yes, right.
In that he now, I don't think there was a great deal of optimism with him coming back from AAA. First of all, he only stayed at AAA for 3 starts, and he didn't even really look that good in those 3 starts.
Right.
He struggled down the stretch last year and then struggled early on this year to get demoted to AAA in the first place in late April, whatever it was, when Zebby replaced him. He's come back, and he had the 1 bad start right away, but in the 3 or 4 starts since then, he's looked pretty good. I mean, the velocity's been up to 93, 94, sometimes 95. He's still not going to be a high strikeout, swing and miss type of guy, but he's gotten through 5 solid innings here pretty consistently. Had some shutout ball that he pitched. I mean, he hasn't saved them because the team's been so bad, but I mean,
Sure.
he's looked and performed much like he did in like April, May, and June of last season, when it was like, oh, well, this is a nice surprise.
Yeah,
and
about that time he was being viewed as a savior. And right now, if things were running a little better, if there was an offense or something, he might be being viewed as a savior right now, because this team, the rotation was so dismal for about 2-3 weeks, in part because we couldn't count on anybody other than Ryan. And now at least we're getting a sense that, that Simeon Woods-Richardson is kind of back to where he was at the first half of last season.
Yes, because, Ryan continues to pitch very well. I think he's a deserving all-star, whether or not he gets in. He's certainly been one of the top, let's say, 10 pitchers in the American League, starting pitchers. He's been excellent, consistently 5+, 6+ innings, 0, 1 run, 2 runs. Really only had the one bad start in Atlanta. Without him, this team would just be an absolute mess of this rotation, at least. But Simeon Woods-Richardson's pitching well of late, which is nice to see. Paddock has really sort of come back down to earth, and he's also at a point from a workload and durability standpoint. He's now pitched as many innings and made as many starts as he did all of last season. And he's already at 90 innings, and he hasn't thrown more than 110 innings since his rookie year in 2019. So he's got a 4.70 ERA. He's not striking anybody out anymore. He's been pretty bad in, let's say, 2 of the last 3 starts, including the one horrible start like 3 starts ago. He's basically just back to where he was last year, which is kind of functional back of the rotation guy.
There's the ball for the 6th on a slider that.
Sorry,
come on,
trying to mute it. There, go ahead.
Yeah. And he just hasn't been very good. And he also just hasn't consistently gone 5 or 6. I mean, they've had to treat him similar to how they have with Simeon Woods-Richardson, with David Festa, where it's like, you get him through the lineup twice, and then you got to go batter to batter with this thing. And Festa, which we just saw, gave up 4 runs in the first 2 innings against Miami. He recovered from that to pitch pretty well, but I mean, okay, fine. He continues to be, what we've referred to as a coin flip situation, where it's not even coin flip between good start and bad start, but coin flip between can he get through 4 innings. And Woods-Richardson has sort of advanced past that, thankfully, at least of late, although I still consider him sort of a coin flip guy too. But Festa has just been so inconsistent, and the bad has outweighed the good for the most part, which we didn't see from him last year. Mostly last year, the good outweighed the bad. And
I mean, it doesn't help on the offense. It just isn't providing any runs at all either. Like, he struggled, and he had a pretty good start versus Detroit, right? That was earlier this week. We saw that. And then the last start that he had the other day, where he gives up 3 runs in the first inning, you give up 3 runs in the first inning, and you feel like it's all over, right? There's no way that this offense is gonna pick him back up. So,
I mean, okay, he's got a 6 ERA and he gave up 4 runs in the first 2 innings. I mean, I'm past the point. Yeah, you're right. Like, it'd be great if they could come back from that. They can't. They won't. And you give up 4 runs like that, and he's done that several times now. And I'm a Festa believer. I still am. But his stuff was down yesterday. I wonder if he was either sick or he's not right. I go back to like a month ago when he was at AAA. He missed 2 or 3 starts in a row with arm fatigue. We've learned over the years that when somebody Bailey Ober is a great example of this, right? Bailey Ober had like three starts early last month where he was terrible. And Ober and the Twins were like, oh, he's just going through it mechanically, whatever. Well, it turns out he was hurt. Right. Most of the time when a guy who's pretty good or has had a good stretch suddenly turns into not just a bad performer, but a guy who's having trouble making it through the first inning in some of these starts, something's up with them. And so that's my worry with Festa, especially like I said yesterday, you see the velocity dip by a couple miles an hour or something like that. So that's something to watch, but that's similar to the conversation with Oberts.
Yeah.
What's the choice but to keep rolling with him? I mean, flipping coins with Festa is going to be better than whatever coins with the guys we just mentioned. So
right. Yes.
That's the state of the rotation at this point, and it's not good. And it's gone from a potential strength to, what happened to all that depth basically. And I don't know what the path out of that is. I mean, the path out of it obviously is Festa getting his act together and Paddock, getting back on track and all that. But the reality is you're not going to have Pablo Lopez back until at least mid-August.
You're not it might not matter.
That's what I'm saying.
That's part of the Ober. Like, I'm sort of like, well, maybe he'll be back after the All-Star break. If he's not back after the All-Star break, if he's back 2 weeks after that, Well, then we're past the trade deadline. And as we pointed out in the first segment of this, really the 3 weeks are the rest of the season right now. They've got to show enough during the rest of this season to be able to convince us that there's a reason to follow this team in August and September. Other than, oh, hey, we've made 5 new roster spots on the roster because we've traded away 5 or 6, half a dozen guys. And now we're going to be able to see, some of these guys and see if they've got, see what they've gotten. Festa's got to, for the sake of the team, not necessarily for the sake of their own careers, but certainly for the sake of the team, they've got to perform sometime within this next 3 weeks.
Right.
So
yeah, you got 21 games. That's 4 turns through the rotation. That's everybody's going to make 4, maybe 5 starts during that time, depending how they line things up. You're not going to have Pablo Lopez back.
Yep.
Zebby Matthews maybe comes back, but you need to be realistic about Zebby Matthews. He's got a 6 career ERA. Yeah, he showed some signs of improving, and I still think he's going to be a long-term piece in this rotation. But, to view him as like, just wait till Zebby's back. It's like, well, okay. That speaks to how shaky things have gotten. But
yes, you're right.
Ober now is a huge question mark, not only in terms of if and when he comes back, but what is he coming back as? Right. And I have big questions about Paddock that I've had the whole time, and he slipped a little. And I also just think, can you count on Paddock even making every turn in the rotation during that stretch? Because he's going to blow past any sort of workload inning total that he's had at any point in the past 5 years. I don't know. This rotation, do I have more faith in the rotation than the lineup at this point even? That seems
exactly.
like a crazy thing to say because I have almost no faith in the lineup, but the
I do have, for what it's worth, I have more faith in the rotation than the lineup at this point, but that might just be coming after a 3-run series versus the Marlins.
But the rotation has been worse than the lineup over the last month.
Oh, you're right. For sure.
And it's like, in your mind, the Twins rotation is something.
Right.
But this is not the group that's that rotation. Like you're talking about now, the number 2 starter is probably Paddock, I guess, technically. The number 3 starter is Simeon Woods Richardson, technically. The number 4 starter is Festa, and then the number 5 starter, we don't even know who it is.
Right.
And it's going to be pieced together no matter who it is. So it's like they basically have Joe Ryan and a bunch of number 4, number 5 starters if you're being charitable. And so, whatever notion you have of the Twins rotation, it's not that. It's that one day a week when Joe Ryan pitches. That's the Twins rotation that you have in your mind. So I don't know. I don't think it's a bad combination, obviously. And the bullpen's got its own issues too at times, but the bullpen really is now the only even theoretical strength on this team, right? It's not the lineup, it's not the rotation, it's not the defense, it's not the base running, it's just maybe the bullpen. And it's hard to kind of maximize the impact of a bullpen when your starting pitching is giving up 3 runs in the first inning or 5 runs, and even the lineup can't score.
Even when you're looking at the bullpen, we feel like the top of the bullpen, which is the most important part of the bullpen in general, is really good. But we've just talked about what a drop off there is at the bottom, and one of the reasons why we're seeing so many blowouts is because of the way the bottom half of that bullpen is performing. But to your point about the rotation, maybe being worse than the lineup, what I would suggest is at the very least they've been more disappointing than the lineup. Right? We had much higher expectations for this rotation than the lineup. I think one of the stories we're going to have on Twins Daily sometime this weekend or early next week is just a comparison of the lineup between sort of person by person. What were their preseason? Why did we think they were going to be good? What were their preseason projections versus what they've actually performed?
By the way, we didn't think they were going to be good.
Well, we didn't. Why do we think they would be at least average, or why do we think they were going to be better than they are? Right? Where is the disappointment? Given that we know that Buxton's overperforming and Castro's overperforming, we know that everybody knows that Correa's underperforming. But just amongst the rest, like where is the gap between what we thought this lineup was going to be and where they actually are right now? Well, I think if we did the same analysis on the rotation, it might be a tough analysis to do because you get so many guys who are in the rotation now that we didn't even necessarily have projected to be in the rotation, but we would see even wider gaps, I think, in sort of what we were hoping for and what we're actually getting. So,
Lopez and Ryan both outperformed. Right. The problem is Lopez isn't there. Obviously, Ober now is greatly underperforming because he hasn't been himself for a month and a half.
Exactly.
And then, I don't think many projected Travis Adams making a start in
exactly
early July, or if that's what it ends up being. I think that's probably what I think it'll end up being. But I mean, I don't know. It becomes, and to expand on the bullpen thing, like I agree with all you're saying, but it's a little bit like a football team that their whole sort of approach to winning is, we can get us the lead late and we'll grind out the clock with our great physicality and running game. That sounds fantastic if you can get leads late.
Yeah, right.
It sounds great to have the strength of your bullpen, and really now the only remaining strength of the team be like Duran and Jackson, Varlin and Stewart, Coulomb, etc. That doesn't do you any good if you're down. You have to get a late lead, and that's been difficult. I mean, the scary part,
that's hard to do when you're out, when your pitching staff is giving up runs and your lineup isn't actually scoring runs, right? I mean, that's how we saw them win their game and win the game that they won in Miami, right? They ended up getting a tiny lead and they ended up nursing it through with a little help from some dead ball from the umpire. Through half of a game to, Simeon Woods Richardson was pretty good, and then they turned over to the bullpen. The bullpen managed to eke out a one run squeaker through the to get the one win. But beyond that, they give up a lead early, or they need to score some runs. We're just not seeing it. So
before we talk about some bigger picture stuff, which I wrote about yesterday, let's do our last couple of sponsors here. One of them sponsored the show is BetterHelp. They've been a sponsor for a while now. Here's the kind of the basic premise behind BetterHelp is, if you've been thinking about talking to someone about some issue in your life that you would like help with, or you would like to just talk through, whatever the case, I know from experience, there are a lot of days you wake up and you're like, I don't want to talk to anybody about this. And then once in a while, you might wake up on a day and you might go, you know what? Today I'm ready to talk to somebody about this. The problem then is getting it set up and actually talking to someone. You have to go through all sorts of hoops, scheduling, insurance, all that stuff. BetterHelp really kind of streamlines that for you, and they can set you up with a real licensed therapist who can specialize most of the time in the specific thing that you're talking or wanting to talk to someone about, and they can typically set it up in merely days.
Yes.
And the thing I like is they can also tailor it to whatever you're comfortable. So if you want to do a video chat, you do a video chat. If you don't want to be on camera, you talk to someone on the phone. If you're like me and you hate talking on the phone, you can do a live chat where you're just typing back and forth. Whatever your comfort level is, you can talk to somebody that way, talk to a real licensed therapist, and our listeners can get a nice discount here. You can unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. That's BetterHelp, HELP, BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Talk to someone, figure it out, line it up quickly with a real licensed therapist and in a way you're comfortable talking. BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. And then our last sponsor of the day,
Raycon earbuds.
Raycon earbuds.
We've been doing ads now for Raycon earbuds for, I think, a decade. And it's because they just do things well. Like, they're just well-engineered earbuds that aren't going to break your budget, right? And now they're actually coming out. We've been doing it for long enough that we've seen them, several generations of Raycon earbuds. Now they've got Raycon's everyday earbuds, and they're the perfect summer accessory, whether you're going hard at the gym or enjoying the sun or whatever. You want well-designed, well-engineered earbuds. It's not just like putting wired earbuds into your head. You want something that pairs well with things, and you want something with a long battery life. Well, they've got a 32-hour battery life. It just takes 10 minutes of charging, and immediately you get 90 minutes of battery. So if they do run out, you're able to take care of things, and they start at just half the price of the other premium audio brands. So also good looking, lots of different vibrant colors to match your summer vibe. So go to buyraycon, B-U-Y, buy Raycon, not just Raycon, buyraycon.com/Gleeman to get 15% off Raycon's best-selling everyday earbuds. Right now, Raycon is offering 15% off their best-selling everyday earbuds only at buyraycon.com/Gleeman, B-U-Y, RAYCON.com/Gleeman.
Okay, so let's get into this bigger picture stuff that I want to talk about. So I think, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, they're certainly trending towards a point, and maybe they're already there if you're not optimistic or you're not patient, which I've never been known for either, really, in my life. To be sellers, right? I mean, if we were to just
of course,
drop into the season with no knowledge of anything about the team or the history or anything like that, and you just look at where they are in the standings or where they are in the playoff picture in the American League,
and where they're trending,
where they've been over the last 6 weeks,
right?
And also kind of the state of the things we've just talked about, the state of the rotation kind of collapsing, the lineup not producing, all that stuff. You would certainly look at this team that's 41-46, and you would say, by the time the trade deadline rolls around, I would expect this team to be sellers. And I don't disagree with that. I think this next homestand and really these next 3 weeks, let's say, that we talked about, they need to prove that they're not sellers more so than solidify that they are sellers. At least that's how I view things. Now, if they put together a decent stretch here, and let's say they do go 13-8 over the next 21 games, and they hit the trade deadline, the morning of the trade deadline, they're at exactly 500. Probably at that point, they're only going to be, if they were able to get to 500, they'd probably be, 3 games out of a playoff spot, something like that, maybe even fewer than that. Could you make a case that they should be buyers or at least light buyers? Sure. I mean, maybe they need a starting pitcher to help this rotation. Maybe they need a big bat or two at some position. We've talked about this at times, not so much over the last couple of weeks because they've struggled so much, but going back a month or so. I mean, there are certainly some areas of this team that you could address, and not in a blockbuster way, in a just find me a competent DH, find me a competent right-handed hitting left fielder, find me a competent, fourth starter, something like that, to kind of patch over all these holes, to at least give you a chance, if you have gotten to around 500 by the trade deadline, to at least give you a fighting chance to go on a 2-month run where you can, grab that third wild card spot and at least say you made the playoffs, and who knows once you get to the playoffs. But as I mentioned at the start of the show, the problem is they've been in even better playoff position, significantly better playoff position, the previous 2 years at the trade deadline. They were in first place 1 year, and then last year they were 10 games above 500 and basically had an 80% chance playoff odds. And the front office, or some combination of the front office and ownership from a spending standpoint, said, we're not doing anything. We'll just go with it. Now, 2 years ago, they managed to win 87 games without doing anything. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff series. Success. Right. Although I would like to see what would have happened if they would have added, let's say one more reliever they actually trusted, which was an issue at that point, and maybe one more bat that they could actually deploy, especially right-handed. Would that have made a difference against Houston? Maybe, maybe not. Last year, they could have used the starting pitcher last year. I looked back at what we were talking about and what I was writing about at this time last year.
Let me guess, right-handed outfield bat.
Well, yeah, that's my perpetual thing. But starting pitcher or starting pitchers. Right. Maybe one more solid reliever, which is sort of like, a perpetual thing too. And they ended up doing nothing. I mean, they acquired Trevor Richards, who was cut 3 weeks later after being abysmal and not throwing strikes. And I think he had 11 walks and 7 wild pitches and 2 hit batters in 11 innings. I mean, it was disastrous. That was the only thing they did. And then the year before that, all they did was Dylan Floro. And I guess my thing is, if that's what they do when they have 70 or 80% playoff odds, and when they're in playoff position at the deadline, if that's what they don't do, what do we think they're going to do when they're, sixth in line for 3 wildcard spots and their playoff odds are 20-something%? And the ownership situation has gotten even worse since then, which is sort of hard to believe, but it's true. 2 years ago, I'm not going to say the Pullheads were good owners, but they weren't actively trying to unload the team.
Right.
And they also at that point had not cut salary.
Exactly.
Now we've seen them slash salary 2 years in a row. We've seen them now 8 or 9 months ago put the team up for sale. We've seen them 2 off seasons in a row not invest really anything in the team. I mean, the biggest wattage move was Danny Coulombe and Harrison Bader, basically. And so I'm just assuming they're not going to do anything from a buyer standpoint. And I don't mean literally anything, although that wouldn't surprise me. But it's going to be a very low wattage buying. Okay, so but the flip side then is the thing I've been thinking about more and more, and like I said, I wrote about it for The Athletic yesterday, is if this doesn't go even reasonably well over the next 21 games, which is probably what I would assume, and they hit the trade deadline at 8 below 500, 10 below 500, whatever it is, and then you're 10%, 8% to make the playoffs. I mean, at that point, like I said, if you just dropped in and looked at the situation at that stage, you'd say, yeah, sell. What do you mean? Buy.
Right, of course.
Here's the problem I wonder with that. You have a handful, and we can run through them here in a second. You have a handful of impending free agents, including the 3 guys they signed this offseason, Coulomb, Bader, and Ty France, but also Willie Castro, Chris Paddock, Christian Vasquez. Right. That's it. Those are the 6.
That's it. Those are the 6.
It's one thing to me to say, okay, we've hit July 30th. It would take a minor miracle to even compete for a playoff spot. Let's trade away some or all of these impending free agents, which is fine. And we're going to talk about that. I think that is a viable path to take. Get value for these guys. Anybody who you don't think is going to be on the team next year from a performance standpoint, an age standpoint, or a money standpoint. Get value for them while you can. Like maybe you're reducing your playoff odds from 8% to 5% by trading away a couple of useful role players or whatever, but you need to be realistic and say it's just not happening. Let's at least get some prospects. Let's maybe add a reliever that we like for next year, whatever the return value is on that. I think that makes sense. But to me, the real question that pops up is, well, I guess it's twofold. One, if this front office is worrying about job security, and not to be mean, but if that it goes that way, they'll have missed the playoffs in 4 out of 5 years. They should be worrying about job security at that point, right? I mean, that the team collapsed itself out of the playoffs last year and then has been pretty bad this year. And if they're at a selling point, that means they've missed the playoffs in 4 of the last 5 years. But then also fold in the fact that the uncertain ownership situation creates a level of job insecurity within that.
Right.
And regardless of how the team is performing, if they do sell this thing at some point, which I don't know, if I'm skeptical of that, I guess at this stage, sadly, but more often than not, somebody who buys a team for $1.5 billion comes in and they have their own approach to building out their own front office. They have guys they bring in. They want, new broom sweeps clean sort of thing. So there's a level of, job security being in question from that standpoint. And so if you're the front office and you get to July 30th and you're 7 games below 500, but you're only a handful of games out of the last wild card spot and you still have, 11% playoff odds or whatever, are you going to feel confident enough that you're going to have your job next season, that you're even going to sell away, being willing to sell spare part useful veterans and basically give up on that 10% playoff odds, because then you're ensuring you aren't going to make the playoffs at that point. So think about that. But here's the deeper question that I have. I think certainly you missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years. You collapsed last year, and then all the issues that you have this year, especially with the lineup that we've talked about endlessly for the last several months. I think you could make an argument if some of the circumstances were removed from an ownership standpoint and all that you might want to sell beyond just the impending free agents.
That to me is the bigger question.
You might want to sell core pieces that you have under control for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever. Not because A, you think you can get value for them, but B, you might just have reached the point, which I personally have, reached, and I think maybe headed that way too, which is this group just ain't it. Like this group just isn't going to be, in my mind, a long-term successful core. You need to make changes. But here's the issue with that. One, you have the issue I just talked about, which is, are they really going to remove talent from a team when they might be kind of playing for their jobs as a front office? But here's the bigger thing that strikes me, which is if you think they're going to sell this team in the next X number of months, and you suspect, which is the case often, that whoever buys this team is going to want to put in place their own people. They're not going to want to keep the Pohlads front office in place, particularly when that front office will have missed the playoffs in 4 out of 5 years. It's not like there's some great results-based reason to stick with them, right? If that's all the case, and this front office may not be long for the Minnesota Twins, do you really want them to be the ones making these massive long-term moves that have ramifications that stretch many years into the future in terms of trading away, Joe Ryan, or trading away Pablo Lopez, or trading away Duran or Jax or Royce Lewis, or just insert any player who's part of this core, let alone, maybe a Correa trade situation or whatever. Like, these are big, wide-ranging effects that will go well beyond 2025 or even 2026. And do you really not even trust, although I guess you could bring that up too, like from a how have their trades gone standpoint, it's been, let's call it a mixed bag. But I don't even mean from a trust standpoint. I guess I mean, do you want people who may not even be around in 2026, 2027, 2028 to make these big decisions that will clearly sort of form the face of the team or the core of the team for those years? And that's what I keep coming back to, is like, do I trust this front office to make the big moves? And do I think it's strange to let a front office make the big moves when you're not even certain they're going to be the front office to sort of have to live with the decisions that they make?
Yeah. So I guess I think I understand the factors that you're kind of saying. I like the way you sort of painted the overall environment that's going on in the Minnesota Twins organization right now, in terms of, is there a level of security in and before there's an actual sale, like regardless of whether there's an actual sale, how much insecurity is there in the front office? My perception is there's not much insecurity about the front office. If they'd stay underneath the poll ads, they literally just promoted Falvey to president of baseball operations.
I completely agree with.
Right. So I don't think there's a level of insecurity there. I think there's probably a level of insecurity at the managerial level. But I don't think there's necessarily a level of insecurity overall in the front office. Now, I will also say that both on the baseball side and the business side, there's been a level of insecurity about what happens when new ownership takes over since literally October, when they announced that they're up for sale. Right. That one of the questions I heard was, we're making all these changes to, Dave St. Peter's walking away, Derek Falvey's taking over, we're moving, Thad Levine's leaving, we've got a general manager being promoted. All these things are happening against a background of, we don't know what this organization is going to look like once new owners come in, right? But until I actually hear some news on new ownership, I think it's going. I mean, I think you can also argue that this is one of the problems with the Twins, but I think it's going to be business as usual, right? It's going to be there. We're going to be dealing with the same sort of stasis mentality that we've got. And the way that stasis mentality is like, well, we're just going to continue running it back the way we've been doing it. And the way that's going to be is the free agents, the six impending free agents, all of them are on the market. It would be more damning to the front office to not move those six free agents because they don't know the future of ownership than to move those six free agents, right? That's almost malfeasance to not go and trade those guys away when you know that your playoff odds are 11% and you've got these issues.
Oh, I agree. I'm saying you might have a different opinion of that if it was your job.
Yeah, and I just don't. I don't sense that panic mode. That's a panic mode mentality if they're not trading away those six guys because they're like, we've got to find out some way to do this. And I don't get the sense that anybody over there is listen, there's definitely a level of insecurity and unsure about what the future holds, but I don't get the sense that there's a panic level that is me like, no, whatever happens, we have to try and make this. We have to try and make the postseason this year, or we're all out of a
right. But it's not. They don't have to do anything. Stasis is keeping the guys, right?
Yeah,
but I agree with all you're saying. I believe it is. If they enter the trade deadline well below 500 and they don't trade away at least several of those impending free agents, even from mid-level prospects or whatever.
Sure,
I completely agree with you that to me that is a bright red neon flag where you are just saying this is not
all right. Yeah.
I agree with that. But I will also say that is stasis. That is sitting on your hands, is not trading those guys. It is a more active decision, obviously, to trade those guys. And I just think they haven't done anything for so long now. Not just trade deadline, but the past two off seasons. It's been 2.5 years since they've acquired any player making more than $6 million, okay, in trade or free agency.
Sure.
And so doing nothing has become what they do. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what they want to do. I'm saying that's bleeding down from the decision of the ownership from a resource standpoint. But that's not changed.
But it works the other way on this side. They've been buyers. In that situation, I agree with you. Like that, certainly, I agree with you. It's been a different strat. The lack of being aggressive when you've got in a buyer situation has been absolutely maddening for 2 years. Crazy maddening, right? But they're saving money, but they're saving money by trading away Chris Paddock. They're saving money by trading away Harrison Bader.
But here's the thing: we don't know what they look like as light sellers. We don't. We know.
No, you're right. We've seen heavy sellers.
We've only seen them sell once, and it was in 2021.
You're right.
They basically had 2 good players to sell. They did a great job with Nelson Cruz. They traded 2 months of a 41-year-old Nelson Cruz to the Rays for Joe Ryan. That's one of the best trades in the history of the Minnesota Twins, and it's only going to get better. The other big trade they made right around that same time was a year and a half of Jose Barrios for Austin Martin and Simeon Woods-Richardson, which has been a much less successful trade, obviously. Other than that, they've done some light trading, like I said, in 2017, but that was their first year on the job. I guess what I'm saying is I get your point where you're saying the inactivity has come as buyers or should be buyers. And I agree with that. We don't know what it looks like as sellers. I mean, they might have been inactive as sellers too. Like I just think, because here's what I'll point to. This past offseason, I don't think they were ever going to be sellers, obviously, this offseason.
Sure.
But I think there was an opportunity to make significant trades where you are parting with key major league players. And so functionally, that is sort of selling talent, right? But we would have expected them to trade, I don't know, a core hitter for a pitcher or a different hitter at a different position. That was a debate we had early in the offseason or at the end of last season, and I do think that's something they considered. They decided to stick with the core and run it back, and it's not gone well. But I guess my point is they did have the opportunity to try to shop some of these core guys, the Durans and the Jackses and the Royce Lewises and the
you're right.
Start Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, all these Pablo Lopez, all these
and
guys.
We wondered if they would. Right.
And I do think they did to some extent, but they just decided not to. I guess my point is, functionally, that's not that much different than just purely selling those guys.
Sure.
You're still shopping those same guys around the league. Right. You're just looking more for future value, prospect value, as opposed to shorter term value. And they chose not to do that, which is to me another, check box of stasis.
It's another data point. Yeah, it's another data point in that favor, right?
So I do wonder about that. And I agree with what you're saying that I don't think Derek Falvey, first of all, I think Derek Falvey has a lot of respect for this job and this team. And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think Derek Falvey will have a problem finding another high-level baseball job anytime he wants it. Right. He had opportunities to leave the Twins in multiple past years and decided not to. He surely, if he wanted to, could have been in this same, maybe not now that he's in the dual role, but president of baseball operations, #1 baseball person at other places, including maybe like the Boston Red Sox or something like that. And he basically squashed all those opportunities. If he leaves the Twins on his own or gets fired by the Twins or a new owner takes over, he will be, as quick as he wants it, the #1 or #2 guy in another Major League Baseball front office. And so I think you combine that with the respect that he has for this job and the seriousness with which he takes it. I have no problem with Derek Falvey. Personally, professionally, I think he does a good job on that sort of front.
Sure.
And so I agree with what you're saying that they're going to be realistic. And if they have 10% playoff odds, I don't think they're going to have some meeting where they got to go, boys, the sink is shipping. Or the ship is sinking, excuse me.
I like the sink shipping, though.
Yeah.
Sometimes you buy a sink and you need to ship it.
Yep.
We're going to send it out.
Yep. It's expensive because it's heavy to ship that thing.
I know, but sinks are very heavy to ship. Yeah.
I can't even say. It's early. Let's put it up. It's not even that early. It's 10 o'clock. I'm just dumb. But what I'm saying is, I don't think, to your point, I agree with you. They're not going to have some meeting where they go, look, should we be selling Willie Castro? Yes. Are we going to sell Willie Castro? No, because we got to, finish 82 and 80 again so we can keep our jobs. I don't believe that. But I do believe there's going to be a subconscious notion of, if it's 50-50 and we haven't made a significant move for 3 years, basically at that point, are we going to just say, you know what, let's just play this thing out?
Yeah.
The ownership situation screwed up. It's not to keep our jobs necessarily, but it's like, let's not extinguish any light on the candle of making the playoffs.
Sure.
And I worry about that a little bit because I completely agree with you. If they're not significantly better positioned than they are right now, you absolutely should be selling off the bit part in pending free agents, like we said, the 4, 5, 6 guys, and we can get into that in a second more.
There can definitely be a gray area there, whether, we're talking about if they're clearly sellers, if they're clearly buyers. Well, they're not going to be clearly either one of them, right? They're necessarily probably. I mean, maybe there's a better chance right now of them being clearly sellers than there is. But if over these 21 games, they go 12-9, right? So another 2 games under 500. Then I think your point of how motivated are they going to be to be realistic about their playoff odds? Okay, yeah, they're only 2 games under 500. Yeah, but there's a lot of teams going for the wild card. Yeah, the baseball prospectus is saying they got about 17% chance of making the playoffs. Right. At some point, the level of gray becomes, well, how gray are we at? And the answer is, charcoal, mist. Like, I don't know, right? I don't know exactly where we are on this thing. And so, yeah, I can see where the natural tendency would be like, well, how much are we going to get for these? Well, the truth is that we should just, for those people who have not been through trade deadlines as a seller for a long time, and especially who have not seen it within the wild card piece, it's a lot more. There's a lot more interest. You've got a lot more that you can do as a seller at the trade deadline than you can do as a buyer at the trade deadline in Major League Baseball in 2025. It's not like it was, even 10, 15 years ago, where you had sort of an equal number of buyers and sellers. You've got about 7 or 8 sellers. You've got 22 buyers, so it's going to be a lot easier to end up making those moves. That you can. I think most of the reasons we didn't see trade deadline moves the last 2 years were payroll related, more so than there weren't that many good deals out there related. But I can certainly see both ways. But that's because it's hard to find good deals out there with a buyer, whereas it's pretty easy to find partners to take things on if you're a seller.
I completely agree with that. And just to put a little anecdote onto that, every 3 weeks now, we're putting out at The Athletic called the Trade Deadline Big Board, which is basically the top 40 or 50 players who could be available, realistically could be available. We rank them. We talk about how likely they are to be traded. We give a scouting report. We talk about what it might take to get them, that sort of thing. Our sort of threshold for at least the early ones, it'll be a little different as we get closer to the deadline, because then you'll hear individual guys who are definitely available. But right now, our threshold is 30% playoff odds or lower. And I will tell you that is only like 7 teams, even now, 3 or 4 weeks out from the trade deadline. So to your point, it at one point before the wild card expanded, it was much closer to 50-50. You would often have 12, 13, 14, 15, even sometimes more than that, teams who were below 500 or just enough out of the wild card mix that they were like, we're going to be sellers. Well, now, I mean, you look at the Twins are a great example. The Twins are 5 games below 500. They're only like 4 games out of a playoff spot right now. And so it disincentivizes light selling or sort of choosing to be sellers, and it only leaves the obvious sellers as the ones. And first of all, the obvious sellers don't have that many good players by definition. Right. And there just aren't that many of them. Right now, there's like 6, and in 3 weeks, maybe there'll be 8 or 9 of them. But how many good players do those terrible teams have? And so, yes, the pool is going to be much shallower in terms of selling or obvious selling. And to your point, what that will lead to, just from a simple supply and demand standpoint, is someone like, I don't know, Danny Coulomb or Harrison Bader or even Ty France, who these are not world-beating players. These are good, solid, veteran, well-respected, but role players. There's a reason Ty France was signable for $1 million, and Coulomb cost $3 million, and Harrison Bader cost $6 million. There's a reason the Twins were able to sign these guys late in the offseason for minimal money. But if there's only like 8 other teams selling, how many good lefty veteran relievers are there going to be? Danny Coulomb might be one of the best options. How many legitimate center fielders are there going to be? Harrison Bader might be one of the best options. Right. How many veteran bat, even if it's a pretty light bat, in Ty France are there going to be? And so,
or even veteran catchers to help
Christian Vasquez.
I know. Yeah.
And so I agree with all that, and I do think that even pushes it further towards what we both seem to be on the same page with is, you got to get what you can for these pending free agents, because not only don't I think the Twins should try to bring back most of them, I think from a monetary standpoint, the one guy they might want to bring back is Willie Castro. He's been one of their best players for 3 years, including this year. Well, Willie Castro's going to be a 28-year-old free agent coming off a year where he made $6.5 million. You think the Minnesota Twins are going to be the team to offer him the most money, or anywhere near the most money? And so if you're not going to bring these guys back, either because you don't want to bring them back or they're too old, or in the case of Castro or maybe Bader, guys like that, you don't have the money because the Poleheads aren't spending any money, obviously. Then get what you can. But the bigger picture thing of like the elephant in the room since August of last year has been, in my mind, and I asked Derek Falvey about this and he shot it down. He downplayed it, the idea that what if this core just isn't as good as you thought it was?
So that's the second part of the thing that you talked about. So when it comes to the 6 guys, I think if they are in pretty clearly in the sellish mode, they've got to do it. I take your point that if there's a gray area there, there's a natural incentive to not want to do that. It's one thing to talk about the core as a group. It's another thing to talk about the core as the individuals who are the actual core, right? Sure. And so let's go through the actual core and what we are, who
I can do this. Let me do this by year their team controlled through. I have this in front of me. So
okay.
This will be helpful. So we talked about the 6 guys who are free agents after this season.
Right.
There's only one prominent player, with all due respect to like Justin Topa. There's only one prominent player who is under team control for next year and then a free agent, and that's Ryan Jeffers.
Right. And for him, if they were approached with a good deal for Ryan Jeffers, would that really be considering shaking up the core? I'm not sure it would. And second of all, on an individual basis with Ryan Jeffers, you also have to take into account, they don't have much in the way of catching, but as we kind of talked about, I think on the Patreon last week, which is a great discussion. If people, again, we encourage you to subscribe. This was a mailbag question that came up as somebody sent us. Teams piece together catching situations. Ryan Jeffers is not off limits because they don't have any catchers in their minor league systems that they're really excited about right now.
Yeah, it's not catchers less so than almost any other spot, maybe other than bullpen. Right. Catcher is generally not something that you map out, 5-8 years in advance, because there just aren't that many top line catching prospects, because often catchers are focusing on defense as opposed to offense, but also they age much differently. There's a lot more late blooming aspect of catchers, and they also decline much sooner. So it's hard to say, well, we can count on this guy for 10 years of catching, because the wear and tear on your body means it's more of like a 3-year window, basically. But yeah, so Ryan Jeffers would be, from a team control standpoint, the next kind of wave of, we only have one, you basically have a year and a half of Ryan Jeffers at this point. Then you get into a much bigger group, which is the through 2027 group, which means you have the rest of this year and then 2 full seasons. And I'll just read you these names. This is where it gets really tricky. Right. And the other thing I will add in is all these guys I'm about to read are arbitration eligible already, which means they've already started to earn $3 million, $4 million, that sort of thing. And next year they're going to start to earn $6 million, $8 million.
This group probably represents by itself, if nobody moves, $20 to $25 million increase in payroll.
Yeah, from this year to next year. Yeah, it might end up being a third of the payroll, essentially.
Everybody in this group is going to make $3 to $4 million more, or $2 to $4 million probably, or most of the people in this group are going to make somewhere between like $2 to $4 million more than they made this year.
Right. So I'll just read you. So, and also, first of all, Pablo Lopez, not arbitration eligible, has 2 years after this one where he makes $21 million a year. He's at the top of this list. Yeah, you can't really trade him because he's hurt. I mean, you could trade him.
Right. Well, this is kind of, as I go through the individual ones, I can go like, well, I guess Jeffers would be tradable, right?
I mean, catchers. If a team needs a catcher, it's hard to find a starting caliber catcher, let alone a pretty good one,
for sure,
in Ryan Jeffers. But okay, let me read the 2027 guys. So Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Joan Duran, Griffin Jacks, Brock Stewart. That's basically your pitching staff.
That's right.
And then I'll add in Trevor Larnach in there too.
Right.
So basically, theoretically, your top 3 starters and 3 of your top 4 relievers, and one of your only productive hitters.
Right. And so those guys would all also, I think, kind of qualify as sort of core, right? And of those, the ones that strike me as the ones that would be most movable would be Duran and or Jax, right? I mean, Lopez is hurt. Ryan is awesome. And there, I don't think the Twins are in a situation where they feel like getting rid of him is going to help shake up the core, right?
No.
And Bailey Ober is hurt, right? Now Larnach, if somebody comes sniffing around on Larnach, are they going to be opposed to trading him? Are they going to feel like that's a core move? I don't know. But I don't think he's off limits.
Right.
Clearly.
But this is the group that I guess these are the sort of names that I'm talking about, where it's like these are many of their best players on paper, but even in practice.
Yep.
But they got 2 years of team control after this.
Right.
They're starting to get expensive, which is an issue because of the payroll. They have value just by definition of being some of your best players, obviously.
Sure.
And this is kind of the group I have in mind when I said earlier, do you really want this front office to be the ones trading these type of guys? If you are a believer in shaking up the core and not just trading the impending free agents, but trading the guys who have 2 more years of control, trying to, get value for relievers or do, whatever your approach is that involves 3, 4, 5 of these names that we just mentioned. Do you really want this front office to be the one trying to get that long-term value when they don't have the greatest track record of these types of trades paying off? I mean, they've had some hits for sure.
Sure.
But they've had some big misses too.
Sure.
And even more importantly, at least in my mind, if we don't think this is going to be the front office in 2027, don't we want to allow whoever the front office for 2026, 2027 to actually decide if they want to keep Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez and Duran and Jax? Or and if not keep, don't we want them to be the ones to decide what type of value proposition is acceptable to get for them?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that question, not just because of this trade deadline. I'm glad you're asking it because I think it's going to be the same question that we're going to want to ask in the offseason.
Oh, probably.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even more so in the offseason.
That's why I say it's a much bigger picture. It's not just about this month. It's about just overall the state of this franchise beyond the on-field is the ownership situation. The direct impact of having an uncertain ownership situation is the payroll stinks, right? And we've seen the trickle-down effect of that. They can't make moves. They get inactive, all this stuff. But then there's so much more to that because yes, the payroll is limited. That limits the decision-making. That limits the options, which is bad enough in itself. But then we're sitting here and going, well, if they sell it today, tomorrow, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and the new guys bring in their own front office, do we want the new guys to come in, look around and go, boy, you didn't get much for Johan Duran, or I don't really like the guy you traded Griffin Jax for. Or actually, I would have tried to sign, Joe Ryan to an extension instead of trading him, or, whatever the case may be. And I guess that's my fear is, and maybe it's a moot point. Maybe they don't sell the team and they just stick with Falvey and company forever. Or maybe they sell the team and the new owner comes in and goes, you know what? I like the front office. Those are certainly possibilities. But it really kind of scares me in a way that if they do sell the team and the new owners do bring in their own front office, the last thing I would want to do is start the new guys off at a point where they don't have the talent needed to either compete or to cash in for future value that they prefer. That, they've already, like, they're now a new chef, but the old chef did the grocery shopping. Yeah, and they don't like, the available produce, and they don't like the meat that's been purchased. And it's like, you want me to build this new restaurant with a great new menu? You should have let me shop for the groceries, right? I mean, I remember that was Bill Parcells' thing when he was the coach and he wanted to also be the GM. He said, I'd like to shop for my own groceries. And that's kind of how I feel with this thing, is that if there is going to eventually be a new front office, and it's not going to be 10 years from now, but it might be a year from now. I mean, it might be 6 months from now. Who knows? I just feel like you're starting them at a disadvantage to have to live with the decisions made by the outgoing group. And again, maybe there won't be an outgoing group. It's not like I'm suggesting they get rid of Falvey this week, or even that I think they will, but I guess I'm still operating under the assumption that this team will get sold. And I'm also just know from history of this sort of thing that when teams get sold, the front office, the manager, the coaching staff, those things, even from the business side, like you mentioned earlier.
I think even more so from the business side.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So yeah, that to me presents such another aspect of the trade deadline. It's difficult enough to try to figure out the direction a team should take, to try to figure out how many guys they should sell, whether they should be looking for A-ball prospects, AAA prospects, major league guys. Are they trying to rebuild over the course of 4 or 5 years? Are they trying to reload so that next year's good? I mean, there's so many decisions that have to go into the process of kind of choosing a path and then executing that path at the trade deadline. And I just feel like the ownership situation has like injected so much more uncertainty and handcuffs and limitations, and also, in my mind, contrasting or contradicting motivations, where it's like we should be focused on the future. Is there going to be a future with it? And so I don't know. It's a very tricky situation.
I would say that for the last year and a half. I mean, you see it. It feels like this whole organization is stuck in on a treadmill. You know, they're just running in place and have been running in place really since the decision. Maybe even, I mean, we talk about how they haven't done anything over the last 2 trade deadlines. We also talked about, we found out October before last that they were cutting payroll by $30 or $40 million. Well, as soon as we found that out in that October, we looked back at the trade deadline beforehand and went, I bet you they suspected that was coming down beforehand.
Of course.
I bet you they knew that. They knew that in the middle of the last season. We didn't know that. And that's why we were so puzzled by them doing nothing at the trade deadline.
By the way,
really, we're now in 2 years.
Here's how you know they knew that was coming. They cut $35 million off the payroll even after significant playoff revenue.
Yes, right.
More playoff revenue than they've had in 20 years.
Right.
Home games, multiple rounds, people buying season tickets for the next year to get playoff tickets, they still dropped it by 35. So yes, they absolutely knew in July that this was coming.
So my point being, we've now had 2 years of ownership's decision to not invest in this team, and probably already preparing to sell it. I'm sure they knew 4 months before they actually announced that they were selling it, that they were looking at selling it, or that it was at least on the table. And basically the organization running in place now for 2 years, right? Or in some cases, actively stepping back, right?
2.5 years,
right?
Basically 2.5 years, yeah.
Right. And so
since they brought Correa back before 2020.
Okay, yeah, you can even, you want to stretch it back that far? Go ahead. Yep, that's fine. And so would I expect to see anything different at this trade deadline? Would I expect to see anything different in the offseason? No, of course not. I wouldn't expect that. I do think that there's going to be a level of competence. I think part of, maybe it's my respect for the front office, or maybe it's just common sense, suggests that if they go into this, I think what we're going to see is if they go into this as buyers, they're going to do nothing. If they go in this as sellers, like you said, and if they go into this as sellers, they're going to at least move the impending free agents, or as many of the pending free agents as they can. But it does become a much more interesting question as to, beyond those guys, beyond those 6, how deep do they listen to offers, and what kind of offers do they have to get to trade away? Of the names we've talked about so far, Joan Duran and Griffin Jack seem.
I'll read you the next group too, by the way.
Well, and I want to talk about this next group real quickly too. So let's see.
Those were the 2027 names: Ryan, Ober, Lopez, Duran, Jack, Stewart, Larnach. The guys who are team controlled through 2028. Well, Correa and Buxton.
Right.
Now, technically, they control Correa through several more years, but that's the last guaranteed year of his contract.
And both of those, we should just emphasize to those people who are more casual fans, both of them have no trade clauses.
Correct.
So neither of them is going anywhere unless they want to go someplace.
Right.
So in terms of what are we doing to shake up the core? Those are 2 obvious choices that people will talk about, shaking up the core, but that isn't necessarily in the Twins. They don't have full control of whether or not that happens. So
right. I certainly, within those 2, I would say Correa is much more likely to leave. I'm not saying he is likely to leave, just much more likely than Byron Buxton to leave, because if they've missed the playoffs 4 times in 5 years and he wasn't homegrown. Byron Buxton doesn't want to go anywhere. Byron Buxton wants to spend the rest of his career in Minnesota. He's made that clear over and over, and I hope that's what happens because I would like to see that. Carlos Correa, he thought he was probably going to spend his career in Houston, and then he ended up in Minnesota, and then he thought he was going to go to San Francisco, and then he thought he was going to go to New York, and then he's back in Minnesota. But the problem there is who's going to take 3 years and $35 million a year on a contract of a guy who hasn't performed very well. But beyond those two, the 2028 group, Royce Lewis.
Yeah, now there's the most interesting name to me in terms of you want to talk about shaking up the core.
Right. But also what you're selling extremely low on that.
Exactly right.
But that only matters if there's going to be an opportunity to sell high at some point.
Right. Yep.
You know what I mean? Like it's easy to say, oh, you're selling low, but most of the time you're selling low because of injuries or bad performance, or in his case, the combination of the two. And, I certainly would not be looking to unload Royce Lewis. I'm absolutely not in that camp. I still believe in Royce Lewis. I still think if you can get him feeling decent for a long stretch, he can hit. I'm very confident of that. But there's a reason you would be selling low. I mean, selling low, okay, when will we be able to sell high? Like, I don't know.
And he's a classic example. Like, if the point is we want to shake up the core, odds are that's more likely to make that kind of trade is much more likely to happen in the offseason than at the trade deadline.
Sure.
Right. But that would be an offseason thing. Nobody is like right now taking a look at how Royce Lewis is running around the bases and swinging the bat and saying, boy, we really need to add him to the team in August and September.
Right. It would be some team wanting to add him to their core over the next several years.
That's right.
But he is a prime example, Royce Lewis, of what I'm talking about in terms of if there's going to be a new front office at some point, giving them the opportunity to shop for their own groceries and make their own meal, because the range of opinions on Royce Lewis, both in terms of how good he's been, how good he will be, whether you want him as part of your core, whether he's someone to build around, whether you think you can get value for him, is going to be so extreme. Like the spectrum of opinions on him, even among like major league front office guys. And so it wouldn't surprise me that if you do bring in a new front office, they come in and they go, well, we don't believe Lewis is ever going to be healthy. Let's try to trade him. But it also wouldn't shock me if a new front office comes in and goes, you know what? We love Royce Lewis. Like I was in the organization. We were hoping he'd be there number 3. We were going to pick him, or we tried to trade for him 2 years ago, whatever it is. We want to not only keep Royce Lewis, we want to try to extend him. We want to, whatever.
Right.
I want the person who's going to be in charge for most of the rest of Royce Lewis's time in Minnesota to be the one to make the decision on Royce Lewis. And that applies to some of the other guys too. Yeah. But I guess this makes for a very complicated situation, but only if the selling extends beyond the 6 impending free agents. But I guess what I would tack on to your point about it's been, 2.5 years of stagnation, of not doing anything, of choosing to sit on your hands, pretty much. Yes. Could you just continue to do that? And even if that means, you trade Ty France and you trade Danny Coulomb and you call it a day, I would call that kind of stagnation. But the problem with doing nothing for like multiple years for a team that's not thriving, and for a team for whom your core players are starting to get expensive, starting to age out of their 20s, starting to near free agency and all that, at some point doing nothing eats away at the calendar to a point that you then have to do something.
Sure.
So I guess that's what I'm getting at is, yes, is the most likely scenario.
Everybody's gaining service time. Everybody's getting more expensive. Yeah,
exactly. And the team is struggling too. And so, yes, is the most likely scenario that a team that's done nothing for 2.5 years will continue to do nothing for the next month? Probably. Yeah. Especially with some of the outside factors. But I guess what I'm saying is you can only do nothing for so long. And that's coming from someone who aspires to do nothing in life, by the way. I would sometimes Becky will say to me, what do you even think you'll do if you retire? And I'm like, oh my God, nothing. I want to do that's my dream, is to just wake up in the morning and go, I got nothing to do. No one's better at doing nothing. Okay. I'm an only child who grew up on television and video games. I can make my own something. You know what I mean? And so, but even I think there's a limit to the extent when you're managing a baseball team that's been struggling to kicking the can down the road. You can only kick that can down the road of just hey, we won't do anything. We won't do anything. Well, you do that for another year, and all of a sudden these guys are a year from free agency.
Right.
And so that's why I kind of bring up the bigger picture thing beyond the impending free agents of because here's the other reality. They're going to get calls on Joe Ryan. They're going to get calls on Duran and Jax. They're going to get calls on their best guys. Are they going to turn those down? And are they more or less likely to turn those down because of the uncertainty from ownership? And if that's the case, that sucks, because you don't want the decision-making, which is hard enough on big decisions like that, to be compromised by outside factors to this degree, where it's like, well, we got a pretty good deal for Duran, but if we trade Duran, what does next year's team look like? And if we don't win next year, are we going to be around for 2027 or what? What at some point maybe. There's a performance. I mean, look, let's talk bottom line here. You can respect the hell out of the front office and still say, if they miss the playoffs 4 out of 5 years, how many front offices missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years without backdated history of success? Terry Ryan missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years, but he had a level of success that at least the poll ads found acceptable at that point. I don't know that what the Twins have made the playoffs, what? They'll have made it 3 times in 8 years? Yeah. Something like that. Yep. So I don't know. I wonder about it from that standpoint. Then you toss in the ownership aspect and the new ownership and all that. So I don't know. I think this, more than likely, I think they will be neutral or slight sellers at the deadline based on where they're at right now. But I also think it's going to be very tempting to make bigger moves, and that's where I think this thing gets real murky. Yeah, in a hurry.
I would say I fully anticipate, provided they don't turn things around this month, I fully anticipate we're going to see a number of those 6 impending free agents sold. Some number, I'd probably say 3.5 is the over/under. Okay, maybe, right? Let's
list number. Those guys real quick and just talk very briefly, and then we'll shut up and people can go on to their barbecues today. So here are the 6 impending free agents. I think we mentioned them already, but just to run through them in no particular order, or maybe in order.
I'm going to start with Willie Castro because I got a clip for him.
Okay, Willie Castro, there he is hitting the double. Hitting the double. Yep. Live action on your screen. That's why you guys.
We got fielding clips. We got home run clips. We got all kinds of stuff for Willie Castro.
Don't get cocky here, John. Let's bring let's land the plane here. There's Brian Dozier and Joe Mauer laughing. It's an interesting clip. But yeah, Willie Castro, number 1, he's your reigning team MVP. I think that's probably a little overstating his impact, but whatever. I think the thing about Willie Castro that would make him particularly appealing is, 1, he's actually having a good season.
Yes.
He was an all-star in the team MVP last year, but he's playing offensively at least better than he ever has. The other thing that makes Willie Castro particularly appealing is that he's a switch hitter, so he fits any lineup, and he can essentially play any position defensively. Now, would I want to play him every day at shortstop or center field? No. But you can play him at third, you can play him at second, you can certainly play him in both outfield corners, you can play him some at shortstop, you can play him some at center field. And so the pool of teams for whom Willie Castro could fit in the lineup or defensively is like limitless, because he's a switch hitter and he plays everywhere. He can add a speed dimension, and he's making $6.5 million, which means he's going to have about $3 million left on his contract by the time the trade deadline rolls around. And for teams that aren't owned by the poll ads, that's chump change at the deadline. And so all of those things, money, switch hitting, defensive versatility, speed, and also a well-respected, still 20-something-year-old guy who's having a good season, there's limitless teams that could fit Willie Castro. Now, does that mean they're going to get a top 100 prospect for Willie Castro? No. But from a number of potential suitors, I think he would be the most obvious guy that they would get calls about. And then it's just a matter of, are you trying to get short-term value or trying to get long-term value, or are you trying to get a couple prospects or the best prospect that you can? But I certainly think if they want to trade Willie Castro, they will get offers for Willie Castro because he's a good player and he's a versatile player and he can fit anywhere. The other guys will stick offensively. Harrison Bader, Ty France, and Christian Vasquez are the 3 other hitters who are impending free agents. Beyond Willie Castro. What I'll say about Bader is he's come crashing back down to earth offensively, which, was pretty predictable. That's why I kind of felt like it was a mistake to play him as an everyday player. He's hitting, I think, like 175 over the last 6 weeks or so. But, he's not an impact hitter. He's a, 90 OPS plus type of guy. But he's a legit center fielder defensively. And as we've seen this year, he's an incredible left fielder defensively. And if you're a team out there that's a contender and you got a hole in your outfield, and especially if you have a specific hole in center field, you don't like your center fielder's hurt, your center fielder's bad defensively, there just aren't going to be a lot of available, above average, legit Gold Glove caliber defensive center fielders shopped at the trade deadline.
Yep.
And so a team might look at Harrison Bader and go, hey, he's like an 8 or a 9 hitter. Find me a better hitting, above average center fielder that you can go out and get relatively cheaply at the trade deadline. And so I certainly think as a fourth outfielder or a fill-in defensive minded center fielder, there should be suitors for Harrison Bader too. The other ones are a little trickier, right? I mean,
sure.
Ty France has been incredible with runners in scoring position. He's been incredible in high leverage spots, but he's a first baseman who's slugged below 500 in back-to-back years.
Yeah.
He's got a OPS that's below average overall and certainly below average among first basemen. And if we're just being brutally honest, there's a reason the Twins were able to sign him for $1 million, 6 months ago.
But he does fit the sort of role that we've been talking about for the Twins for the last two trade deadlines, right? Like, hey, we're just looking for a decent right-handed bat.
Right.
Well, he qualifies as a decent right-handed bat.
Yeah, although he's only a first baseman. Most of the time we're talking about.
Usually we're like a corner outfielders.
Right. And so I think that limits him. Are there going to be contending teams for whom Ty France with his, 680 OPS? Because I can assure you there aren't going to be contending teams who are focused on his batting average with runners and scoring. But I think that's not how front offices are going to think. But are there going to be contending teams for whom Ty France would be a clear upgrade at first base or DH as an everyday player? I doubt it. I mean, maybe there's one or two.
Yeah,
I think
he's the trickiest. He and Vasquez, I think.
I think it's plausible that a team might say, "Yeah, we got a first baseman who's better than Ty France. We got a DH who's better than Ty France, but we could use a right-handed veteran, contact-oriented bat off the bench. We'll start him against lefties. We'll, pinch hit, stuff like that." I think there are certainly teams, especially the price is right from a salary standpoint. He's cheap as hell. Who would say, "Yeah, let's add Ty France as just sort of our last bat. Maybe he pinch hits in October. He can come through with some runners on or whatever." But the problem there is you're not going to get anything for someone who's filling that type of role. I mean, you might get an A-ball marginal prospect, a lottery ticket type of guy, but that's fine because first of all, Ty France has cost them nothing, and he's not going to be on the team next year. So get whatever you can for him. The Vasquez one, I mean, I'm going to try not to be too harsh on Vasquez, but he's hitting 160. I think he's still a good defensive catcher, but he's no longer a very good defensive catcher, I think. I mean, his throwing hasn't been particularly good. His framing has declined a little bit, which is often what you see with age, because framing is often about agility, hand-eye coordination, reaction time, that sort of thing. The bar for a passable backup catcher is really low in terms of offense. And so maybe there's a team out there who has a starting catcher they like, and they're headed towards the playoffs, and their backup catcher's been a mess, and they value the defense and the veteranness. He's got 2 World Series and the leadership aspect and just the game management aspect. And they say, is Vasquez a better hitter than our random backup catcher we have? Probably not. But would Vasquez be more valuable to us on a run to the World Series than a 24-year-old guy who can't hit? Yeah, probably. But similar to France, even if you get a team to bite at that, what are you going to get for him, really?
Similar to the Twins picking up, say, Sandy Leone in 2022, something like that. Like,
right.
You're just looking for somebody out there who's like, well, let's just see. That we're trying to build a team for the postseason here. We want veterans. We want people who have been there. We don't really have anybody that we trust right now in our backup situation. Let's get somebody that isn't going to necessarily get 20 starts between August and September, or 30 starts in August or September, but somebody that we have out there, we know he's not going to mishandle the pitching staff. He's going to control the running game a little bit. So, well,
and there's even like for the reason the Wolves just re-signed Joe Ingles, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's like this guy's going to sit on the bench. Would we rather have a 2-time World Series winning, well-respected veteran as the guy who sits on the bench, or some guy who was at AAA last year? But from the Twins standpoint, you're not going to get anything from him. It might come down to, at the trade deadline, he's making $10 million this year. That means he'll be owed, $4 million after the trade deadline. From this Twins standpoint, and certainly from the Pohlad standpoint, that might just be about how much of that can you shed? Can you get a team to take on half of that $4 million? Or it could be about, hey, if we cover all of that $4 million, we being the Twins, will you send us a marginal A-ball prospect or something like that? But I guess that would be the order of how much interest and also what I think you could get from return from a hitter standpoint. I think it would go Castro, Bader. It would go Castro, drop off, Bader, drop off, France, big drop off, Vasquez. Then you have two pitchers, Chris Paddock and Danny Coulombe. And, we just spent time talking about Paddock has struggled and Paddock has question marks from a durability standpoint. And Paddock is not necessarily the guy, if I were a contending team, that I would target to make a big second half impact, considering he really hasn't been healthy for second halves generally. But the other thing we know, and this goes back to you saying how shallow the pool of sellers are, even a passable fourth or fifth starter is a relatively scarce commodity at the trade deadline.
Right.
Because there are going to be contending teams who aren't happy with the back of their rotation. There are contending teams who are like, we can't afford to just punt games every fifth game. Is Chris Paddock going to pitch for us in a playoff game? Probably not. But could Chris Paddock give us 12 decent starts down the stretch when we have some injuries to our rotation or we don't have any AAA guys ready to? I mean, for the same reasons we talked about it with the Twins, right? I mean, the rotation depth is needed across the league. So I could see a team.
I mean, he's also the kind of guy that because he had a pretty decent stretch and now he's had a little less stretch, like what he does in the next 4 games might be the sort of thing that moves the needle one way or the other on him, in terms of, if he looks strong for 3 of those starts and they're like, we could use a guy that can go 6 innings and eat some innings. And we need, they're facing a situation like the Twins are. We're like, boy, we've got Travis Adams starting every 5th inning, every 5th game. Like that looks like a pretty good pickup. We just need somebody that we, in the 8 starts that we're going to have for them in August and September, that we feel like we've got a chance of winning those games with Paddock on the mound. So.
I mean, think of the Twins the last 2 seasons where they were contenders. They made the playoffs once, and it took a collapse not to make the playoffs last year. They could have used the starting pitcher, but the problem is last year, part of the reason they could have used the starting pitcher is because Chris Paddock didn't pitch the second. And so I guess they go back to that. But in terms of value, I guess I would put him maybe between Castro and Bader, or at least at the Bader level, where it's like good, solid player. The much like Bader as a center fielder, the role of pitcher is going to be in more demand than other
I think
roles.
I put Bader above Paddock right now, but I think Paddock has the chance to put himself above Bader.
Okay, that's reasonable. And then the last guy we haven't mentioned, which I actually think is probably the biggest no-brainer, both for the Twins to shop and for another team to come calling about, is Danny Coulombe. Danny Coulombe is 35 years old. He was signed for $3 million. He missed a month with a forearm strain, but has returned and looked pretty decent. Overall this season, he's been excellent. He's got an ERA under 1 in like 25 innings. Yep. He's pitched well against lefties. He's pitched well against righties. And then the other thing he's proven over his career, but especially this year, he has rescued other pitchers from jams in the 5th inning, the 6th inning, where he comes on with, 2 on, 2 outs and gets a massive out to help another pitcher. And that doesn't really show on his ERA to the extent that it impacts a game. But I looked yesterday, he's inherited 23 runners, which is a lot, and he's stranded 20 of them, which is an incredible rate. I mean, a typical rate is like you allow a third of those guys to score, basically. If you're a team, first of all, almost any contending team could use another reliever or 2. We've been through this with the Twins in past years. There's almost never been a year where it's like, hey, the Twins are trying for the playoffs. They definitely don't need to add to the bullpen. It's always like they could use one more good middle reliever. And then being left-handed is a help there too, because he's a guy who can spot against lefties and shut them down. He's also a guy who can just come in, get out of jams. If you need him to pitch late in a game, he has some experience doing that. But as a just sort of guy you deploy in the middle innings, the number of teams that could use Danny Coulombe is essentially the number of teams that are buying. Like if you're a team trying to make a playoff push, you could use Danny Coulombe. And from the Twins standpoint, I'm not saying I wouldn't want him on the team next year, but he's 35. He's an impending free agent. He was available for $3 million. If you want him on the team next year, you can just re-sign him as a free agent. So he would seem like a very obvious guy to shop, but also again, what are you going to get for a soft tossing 35-year-old middle reliever?
I mean, you might have a chance because there's going to be multiple bidders on him, but the truth is you might be getting more than he's actually kind of worth, but you're still not going to get to the point where he's going to be bringing back you a top prospect, something like that.
So. Right. So those are the 6 guys, and we'll see how this homestand plays out. Obviously, by next Friday, we'll have a much better idea what the situation is and if they're capable of kind of climbing out of this hole to any extent, or if they just keep on digging. If they keep on digging, then it's going to become more obvious than even now that they should be sellers. And who knows? Maybe we'll talk to Falvey at some point during this homestand, hopefully. So we'll see. But I think that's kind of where I'm at here. And this 9-game homestand suddenly feels extraordinarily important, not just from the standpoint of trying to save this season, but from the standpoint of being able to point to a path at the trade deadline and say, this is the path they should take.
And whichever way they go and whichever way they're trending, we're going to be covering it a lot more frequently on the Patreon channel, patreon.com/Gleeman. We've got one coming up Monday. We've got one coming up Wednesday. We've got the All-Star Week. You're going to want to have some stuff to listen to and talk about. And then we've got, a lot of, and then if there's any trades at all, we immediately do emergency podcasts. So we've got it out there for you the next morning. You'll know everything you want to know about who they lost and maybe who they gained, which when it comes to if you're selling and you're talking about prospects and so on, you're going to get a good sense of that, as well as cover the various rumors of, who might be available or who might not be available. And then, we've just talked about sort of the obvious free agents. We haven't really even gotten into what's going to happen, like when we hear some rumors about somebody sniffing around Joan Duran or Byron Buxton or something.
Or, by the way, how about like the Mirandas and the Julians of the world?
Right. Yeah, right.
A team might feel like is a bounce back candidate and maybe the Twins are kind of done with them. Those guys could be traded too. So yeah, we'll get into that a lot more in the upcoming weeks on Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. In the meantime, though, thanks to our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got Raycon, we've got Game Time, we've got BetterHelp, and we've got our presenting sponsor, which is Blackstack Brewing. Blackstack Brewing. They're our presenting sponsor. We're excited to have them for the entire 2020-25 season. Now they're being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. So stop by your favorite liquor store or the Blackstack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew. Try something new. Bring it to the parties for you on 4th of July weekend this time. Anything else we need to cover here, Aaron?
No. Let the people go to their barbecues. Goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye. And welcome to the end of this video. There's lots more. For another, just click on one of these boxes.
Or click on this circle in the middle to subscribe to all of our Twins Talk.
Thank you.
Gleeman